Wake up. It's time for Primal Scream. I'm Matt.
I am Todd.
And this is going to be a continuation of our last podcast. This is going to be podcast 7B.
Yep, 7A was quite a rocking and rolling thing happening.
It had a lot of MMA talk. We talked about Keone Coke, his business, him as a fighter, things like that. But then we started to delve into some other things. And to tell you the truth, that conversation lasted 3.5 hours. So we had to cut the first one short. This is going to pick up right where the last one ended. So hopefully you just finished with that last one, because if you liked that, you're really going to like Part B.
Part B is pretty fantastic. If you please go back and listen to 7A if you didn't get a chance to. But 7B, we delve into a lot of other issues that I think you'll enjoy quite a bit.
Yeah. So stay tuned. Let me get something in. Have you noticed? I mean, I spend a lot of time on YouTube. I have a great job. I have a very boring job, but it's actually going to kill me. It's killing my body. I've gained more weight in the last 4 years than I. That's neither here nor there. Never mind. Anyway, I watch a lot of YouTube. All right, suffice to say, I got time. You pull up YouTube videos recently, and they always had those little ads before the video starts. And recently, which surprised me because I brought this up in a previous podcast about how I'm surprised we don't have more of a revolt, because movies are so prolific in our society, and an overwhelming theme with a lot of movies is we're fucking this shit up. Our government's fucking this shit up.
Right.
Everybody knows it's illegal shit that's going on. Everybody knows that it's the market cornered, whatever. But they're doing some really illegal shit, and it's all fucked up, and we should stand up and we should change it. Well, on YouTube, this ad comes on before I'm watching whatever show it was that I'm going to watch, and it's talking about how Congress had no problem passing the Obamacare until they realized that they were going to have to pay higher prices, and then they changed it so that they didn't have to pay higher prices. You know, it's this whole ad, and it's very simple. It's stick figures, right? And it's a stick figure over on the right and a stick figure on the left, and they look exactly the same, except for the one on the left has this little top hat on. He's supposed to be the congressman. He's supposed to be the person in politics. And they're saying, hey, we all eat the same. We all act the same. You and I, we're the same, except for when I pass a law and I don't want to pay for it. Mm-hmm. And then the politician doesn't have to pay for it, but we all do have to pay. And I just thought, again, here is another reminder, and it's getting more and more in your face about people are awake to this bullshit, this corruption that's happening. And it's just like, I feel like there's just thinner than a hair.
I think
it's really little membrane before we freak out.
One of the things I think is a difference, and Rock and I have talked about this before. Do you think that you can change it? I mean, so the Tea Party, before it was, overran by the Koch brothers. Sorry. Yeah. It was a grassroots, we want something to change kind of talk, yeah. And it was one of those things where like, oh, so this is it's like the hippies in the 60s, we're gonna change things. We don't agree with what's going on. We're gonna change it. And so Rock and I talked the other day about we were talking about accreditations for education, and they're trying to label everybody who does anything education wise outside of general education as a multi-categorical teacher, so to speak. And so nobody's specialized anymore. So nobody's like a learning disability teacher or a reading specialist or a behavior specialist. They're all kind of lumped into this big thing. And it's some guy sitting in an office somewhere who is not involved in education, who is arbitrarily saying, oh, you're right, this is a much better idea. Let's just label everybody this one way. And so Rock's, reaction was, well, that's the way government works. And I said, well, what if we put you in there? You're an intelligent guy. You would bring in the right people. You would make better decisions because you know the base of knowledge to work off of to make those decisions. So when you talk about government or changing laws or how it's all flawed and it's all fucked up. I agree with most of it. Okay. What if we put you in there? So we have Steve King. They're all a bunch of douchebags most of the time. Steve King from Iowa is just one of the craziest fuckers I've ever heard talk in my life. What if we said, we're going to hire you? So Rock is going to be the new senator from Iowa who's going to represent, the western part of Iowa in the current government that we have. So do you feel that in a position like that, and I'm kind of putting you on the spot.
No, go for it.
Would you say?
I love being put on the spot.
I do.
Would you? You're aware of all the ins and outs of what of lobbyists and all that kind of stuff.
Sure.
My point is not to put you on the spot and
No,
you can't do it. You can't do any better. It's more of like, so you're put in that position. So is there pressure to be changed? Is there money put in your pocket that makes you want to make different decisions? But at the same time, being a thoughtful, aware person, couldn't you say, I'm not playing your game?
There's only a few politicians that I know of that have been able to resist the temptation from lobbyists.
Ron Paul.
Ron Paul's one of them.
Bing.
His son, Rand Paul's the other one. And right now there's a guy in Michigan named Justin Amash. They're the only ones I know of. There might be others. But, there's been lobbyists who've come straight out and said, we tell our colleagues that don't even bother talking to Ron Paul. He's not going to listen to you. He's not going to be influenced by your money. So there are some out there. And I think maybe a lot of other politicians, they get into politics thinking like, I'm not going to be corrupted. I'm going to be a straight arrow. I'm going to go in there and I'm going to hold to my principles. But I think it's so pervasive. I think the lobbying is so strong and so persuasive that a lot of them cave. And they see the money and they go for it.
Well, I relate to your dad quite a bit. I'm a huge Obama supporter. I have a lot of issues.
Why?
I have a tremendous amount of issues now. Obviously, as a thinking person, thank you very much. Bombard me.
Sorry.
You have an idea of what you want to have happen, or you hope somebody is going to do, and so. Is that what it is? That it just you're going to be corrupt, and so so the four of us are put into a situation where we're all congressmen of our states. So a couple of us are representatives, and a couple of us are senators. What keeps you from sticking to your core values to make sure that you don't have those things happen? You know what I mean?
I'm sure it's the
so
lobbyists.
What changes?
Justin Amash come out and said, like, as soon as he went into his office for the first time, his phone was ringing off the hook with lobbyists on the other end. They bombard you as soon as you get elected.
Well, and what I've heard, again, I'm a huge NPR supporter, but NPR did a thing where this guy, I think I've said this a couple times in this podcast, the guy was actively going after the lobbyists. He needed to make money. The 4 years he was in, the last 2 years, he was calling other people to make sure they had those people in the right room at the right time, lobbyists to give him money. So it was the opposite of what we thought. We thought that lobbyists are like always calling people, which I'm sure that happens as well. This guy was actively going after the lobbyists.
I think depending on who it is,
that's terrible.
Depending on who it is, you're going to get money somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Unless you're a Ron Paul, it's kind of like the analogy of if you're a rock star or NBA player, you're all over the place. You're all around the United States, and you have tons of money, and you have all these women throwing themselves at. You have tens. You have beautiful, perfect women who all they want to do is fuck you. That's all they want. They just want your dick, and they want to do the most debaucherous type of shit you've ever thought of, and they just want you. The idea of, it's laughable, but
I'm laughing at you.
The same mindset.
It's the same mindset. If you think about how hard that would be to resist that type of class.
To me, it's a culture problem. And this is why we're talking about, the four of us are sitting in here. We're all senators. And what are we going to do? Or what limit are we going to stretch to get, our office? The real question is, to me, if I'm the incumbent, I'm the guy that's there already, right? I've got there, or I've done what I've needed to do to get here. And somebody here is new coming in. We live in a society now, and we have a government now that is basically a highest bidder. You know what I mean? If I take a stance, and I've talked about this online many times, the war on drug, if I take a very, very open stance on drugs and say drugs should be legalized. The war on drugs is an obvious failure. There's a shitload of evidence to support this. It doesn't work on any way or any spectrum.
Undermine self-ownership.
Yeah, we need to get rid of it. Here's what I deal with. I deal with the alcohol lobby. I deal with the tobacco lobby, the law enforcement lobby, the private prison lobby, which is huge now, saying we're not going to give you a fucking dime unless you just say no to drugs. And it's easy stance to take, so just do it. If you don't, I'm going to give all of my campaign contributions to your guy over there, and you're not even getting into office anyway. So we have an environment and a culture in Washington, D.C. that is openly bought and sold. And it's like a fighter that has a sponsor. You know what I mean? My sponsors help pay my bills. Well, the people that sponsor these politicians that are running for office, sometimes time and time again, they have sponsors too. And those sponsors are telling them what to do. They're saying, this is the stance we want to take. We'll contribute to your campaign if you bend a little bit my way, which means what my mom told me when I was a kid was true. And that is the people that we think run this country don't run this country. Wealth runs this country.
Right.
Money drives this country. And when you have a situation like that and you expect anything but corruption, you're just naive.
I was going to say, because money corrupts everything.
Yeah.
I mean, I hate to.
The weird
go
part
way
is that
down.
he said his mom said that to him when he was a kid.
Well, my mom.
So I mean, to me, it's like it's so highlighted and so profound nowadays. How can you miss
Because
it?
of the internet and free flow of
Yeah,
ideas.
but he's
and
saying he heard it from his mom. So his mom, even back in the
aware.
day,
Yeah.
was like,
Well,
his mom
this
and
is
my mom
bullshit.
should get together and
And
go bowling.
my mom was
because my mom told me about JFK's assassination and how the conspiracy
Maybe his
behind
mom
it.
doesn't want to listen to porn scripts.
My mom was
It
a
was
hippie,
really
and
good.
you were talking about the hippies.
Yeah.
You know, when I stepped out here for a second, what's interesting about the hippies is they had it right, in my opinion, but they were pussies. They weren't willing to fight for it because free love and happiness. My mom was a hippie; she told me all about this. And the hippie movement was all about inclusiveness and self exploration, and really as a human race, where we should have been going collectively in terms of ideologically speaking and unification. And it got crushed. And it was almost like when the establishment crushed the hippie movement and the free love movement and, make love, not war, people kind of gave up on the idea that revolt was possible. We got the civil rights movement that took place. We were pretty satisfied with that, any forward thinker. Women's rights movement took place. We were satisfied with that. And I think people went, oh, everybody's equal now. We don't have anything to revolt. We don't have any problems. We're just gonna do this. And we haven't had any great calamities to live through since. But I think there's an idea that when you start talking about revolt, people are like, oh, well, that's ludicrous. And I think part of the reason is because we're so stupid. We don't realize how raped we are economically on every level and politically on every level.
And
Part
it's,
of it
it's
is
hard to
we-
hear that too,
Yeah.
because Bill Maher's a big person who says that we are fucking stupid.
We're stupid.
We're just
Yeah.
stupid.
Stupid as shit.
Well, you wonder, is that because you just talked about the free flow of knowledge and the internet and things like that? We're not able to be informed. We're not able to find the things the information we need to make good decisions and find good answers.
I think it's a purposeful disruption. I think that when you look at something like the free market, what technology has exploded in not only potential interactivity, but also in terms of competitive pricing in the last 20 to 30 years.
Electronics.
Anything with a screen on it.
Yeah.
TVs, 5-10 years ago, I wanted a plasma TV, cost me thousands of dollars. Now it costs me nothing. Same thing with computers. Computer technology doubles every 18 months and gets cheaper. It gets cheaper twofold. The iPhone, personal data assistants, all of these things have exploded in potential because there's a market for them, but that market is incredibly divisive. You have people disconnecting, not having conversations like this, but sitting on their phone and texting for 3 fucking hours. You know what I mean? We went from the Pony Express to the telephone, or the Morse code, then the telephone, a marvel of technology where I could speak to Rocky, even if he was in China. That's fucking amazing. To email and then texting. You know what I mean? We really are kind of going backwards in communication, and we're being distracted by a lot of the things that are being almost seemingly allowed to develop to keep us not talking. You know what I mean? To keep
Right.
us
Right,
on
but at the
level.
same time,
but
we're
it's
using it-
promoted as being connecting.
Yeah.
Sure,
it's promoted.
It's
but
the evolution, but it really is stepping backwards.
It is dissociative, and it's not guys and gals sitting around and going, let's smoke a joint and talk about what's great in the world and peace and love and happiness. It's robots. It's zombies staring into a screen, and that screen gets more and more interactive all the time. Whereas when I was younger, the year 2000 was going to be a year that I couldn't imagine. You know, the year 2010, we'll be floating in cars. Like, I mean, technology is going fast enough that I can tell great things are going to happen. The internet was a new thing when I was younger, and all you heard people talk about all the time, and we were just talking about this the other day, is, education's going to be free in the future. Now that we have this World Wide Web, you can get a college education for free.
And fuck, it's more expensive than ever
Before. And what are you getting? You're getting a certificate that says I'm a sucker willing to go into debt and potentially find no job because they shipped all of them out of here, and now I have no means to pay off this debt. Not everybody,
right?
But a lot of people.
I mean, look at University of Phoenix Online. All right, I was a sucker for that. I was a sucker because my job that I worked at, my employer that I worked at previously said, if you get an A or a B, we'll pay for it. Fine, fuck it. If you're gonna flip the bill, I'll do it. But you don't even have fucking professors. You don't have professors teaching those classes. There's no books. They're all electronic.
Yeah.
Right? You don't have to pay for somebody to print out a fucking book. You don't have to pay for electricity to light a classroom or to heat a classroom, or you don't have to pay for somebody to go to the classroom. There's no fucking expenses. But that class every 5 weeks costs more. It's like $1,600.
And they're guaranteed to get the money.
And the worst.
And the person teaching the class is just somebody who's really good at that subject.
Right.
And vets right now are the ones who are getting just screwed the most over everybody else. That's the worst part.
But when you look at something like that, I had high expectations when I was a kid, and maybe I was a different kind of kid that was actually paying attention. I think a lot of it had to do with my upbringing. I had high expectations technologically and humanitarianly, for what the world had in the next 20 years. I honestly thought by this time borders would have vaporized and we would have formed some kind of collective world humanity. You know what I mean? Not a government, but like an interconnected world where the world could vote on issues based on their geographic region. And there was true liberty across the planet. And what we have is cars and gasoline. In order to have borders evaporate, you'd have to have politicians willing to give up their power. Right. So we're probably not going to see that happen. And furthermore, even beyond the politicians, banks and people in even higher positions that have a stranglehold on economies, world economies, and certainly aren't going to go, let's give all of our power and influence up for the greater good. Because these people have been raised in families that believe that they're entitled to run the world, that people like us are incredibly stupid and unworthy of the kind of control and influence they have.
And I guess the example to me is it HSBC, the bank that is known to have laundered money for cartels, known to have laundered money and transferred money for terrorist groups.
That's our government, though.
And they are not. We're with our current idea of what terrorism is and cartels, and it's a well-known thing, but there's nothing being done because if that bank went down, something would happen. And so when you talk about people being stupid, it's like it's right here in your face. I mean, because you and I can go on about the idea of the government being that way, which I would agree. But when you have that example though of a bank who does those things and everybody thinks of a bank a certain way, it's pure ignorance, or it's willing to just like disillusion yourself.
But we also have well-known examples of it's common knowledge now that the United States government gives weapons and funding to Al Qaeda in Syria. So our government's doing the same exact thing that bank was doing. It's well-known knowledge that the current administration gave weapons to Mexican drug cartels, but nothing happens about that either. So banks are, even though what they were doing in that situation is deplorable, I mean, our own government does it and we know about it, and nothing happens.
And the government sells us on the idea that that if they go in and they arrest these bank heads and they put them in jail like Iceland did, that our economy is going to fail, which means they're admitting that these people are above the law, that they can do whatever the fuck they want and they can screw it. They can support Mexican drug cartels, which murder hundreds of people every single year, entire villages and towns and shit. And that's perfectly fine because, our economy is going to take a real big hit if these guys get arrested. I don't care. That then our economy is built on a foundation of complete bullshit.
Right.
Indeed. Well, we also had, they even did a ABC News special, wasn't it? about our soldiers protecting the poppy fields?
Yeah.
In Afghanistan?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
They don't
That's
even
really,
lie.
really fucked up.
The
They don't
information's
lie.
out there.
They don't lie, but they spin it in such a way. They're like, hey, listen, if the poppy fields are all gone, if we were to actually burn these fucking fields or salt them like they used to do back in the medieval days where nothing would be able to grow again, then the people who fight us would be like, we got nothing better to do. Let's just fucking keep fighting real hard.
Yeah.
We got to give them something to do. So let's leave the poppy fields here so that they have something to do so that we can have a lull in the action.
Well, and so that we can put a bunch of people in prison back home when they do these drugs.
Exactly,
Absolutely.
when they ship it over to
Absolutely.
us.
Does anybody listen to Alex Jones?
Yeah.
Occasionally.
Yeah,
Okay.
I like his rants from time to
He's-
time.
I do.
Sometimes they're
nuts.
hilarious.
See,
Yeah, exactly.
You think he's nuts. He's hilarious. He does weird things, but he also brings up,
Good
I don't know,
points.
half the time, at least half the time,
His
he brings
delivery.
up good fucking points.
His delivery sucks, but his information is credible most of the time.
Yeah,
to be
and you
honest.
have to
Yeah.
think about that. I would listen to his radio show once a day. I'd listen to it all the time, and I would think, okay, I'm picking out good parts of it. I would also listen to O'Reilly. I would also listen to Sean Hannity. You know, I would try to get a full picture. You know, to think, okay, why are these people? Why are the people on the right looking at things this way? And why are the people on the left looking at things this way? And why is that crazy fucker going off and screaming? And
He gets nuts, doesn't
he does.
he? He
But,
sure does.
I mean, his whole show is about how fucked up the world is and how fucked up the government is and how
Right.
there's a higher power or there's a higher society ruling us, and that we had to step up and take it. But he never says, hey, this is step 1, 2, and 3. This is what we have to do.
Right.
This is how we change things.
He's all about just creating awareness.
I mean,
Yeah.
creating awareness is one thing. Okay, now I'm aware, but I'm still following that track.
Right, right.
So how do you change things?
Well, I think Alex Jones advocates for reverting back to constitutional principles, which I view that idea as basically hit and rewind and then press and play again, because government's always
is going to
go down that natural path of evolution.
Cyclical.
Yeah, exactly. Of just expanding its power, abusing its powers, and getting to the point where people's freedoms are totally undermined. So, I don't think that's the best option, because I don't think people will be vigilant enough to keep them in check. And it's, we've had a pretty good experiment with constitutionalism, but I think it's safe to say at this point that it's failed.
And we know what needs to be done. Does Alex Jones or anybody else need to tell us? No, we've already been through this before. This is how we arrived at this point. We had a revolution. So let's go back and let's look at the reasons why we had a revolution. Unjust taxation.
It was 2%.
Oh, wow.
That's why they were freaking out. 2%.
Unjust taxation is why you revolted, huh? Because I'm working 3 months out of the year essentially in slave labor before I make a fucking dime. You know what I
In
mean?
the Stamp Act.
Yeah,
and
there's
soldiers in their houses. and everything.
there are plenty of things that we know what we should be doing. Right now, we're facing a corrupt empire that I would argue is potentially more corrupt and more empirical than the one that we fought around.
Oh hell yeah!
Oh,
way more.
absolutely.
Way more.
I would totally agree.
When you get
You
to a
fucking America
But
haters.
the difference here
fine.
is
That's fine. If we get to a point, this is more about ideology and principles. If we get to a point where I'm pledging allegiance to a flag and that flag represents a federal government that's bought and paid for and completely full of shit, I don't pledge allegiance to that flag anymore. I pledge allegiance to the ideals of our forefathers. I pledge allegiance to modern ideas and modern morality and secular morality. But I'm not going to just sit under this flag and bow while there's this fucking asshole that told me that he deserved a Nobel Peace Prize, got my vote, and then sent drones overseas to bomb innocent kids. That's not the type of shit that I'm paying for with my tax money or my vote. We've gotten to a point where the people have every justification to revolt. They won't.
they won't have to.
They won't because they're pussies. They're fearful of everything. They watch all of their information. They get all of their expert analysis on TV, and they can't make a conclusion for themselves to save their lives. And they certainly won't act until either A, 51% of the population does, and conformity is cool, and I truly believe that.
right.
Or they reach a point in their lives where they're suffering so much
We talked about
that
that.
they
last
have
Yeah,
to.
our personal bubbles have to be affected.
Exactly.
Because there's people that are living in tent cities under bridges
Right.
who have been thrown out of their houses because of bullshit banking practices. Who bankers said, "Oh, sure, well, yeah, we'll approve this loan. It's a balloon loan. Do you understand what that means? No, hey, you don't have to. But in 5 years,
Here's
we're
a
gonna
nice house
fucking
for
take
you."
your shit back."
So let's talk about the bailouts for just 1 second, because I was in the investment industry and I saw this happen and just laughed while I did. Sadly, banks loan a bunch of people money under somewhat false pretenses. People can't pay their mortgages, go into foreclosures. These banks will oftentimes reclaim these homes. These people are left in complete debt. The government says our economy's taken such a huge hit because these people all are foreclosing and can't pay their mortgages.
Terrible people.
Yeah. What we're going to do is we're going to bail out the people that fucked the people in the first place.
And the people who took out the mortgages who have no homes, they'll just figure things out.
Yeah,
on their
they'll
own.
figure it out all by themselves.
They should have known better.
And what they did is they set back a generation.
But why
of
bail the
Americans.
banks out?
You know, the banks should have been allowed to fail. And if the banks were allowed to fail and it affected, there was a shockwave through the American economy and we went into a 10-year depression, that's the way it's supposed to be. That's you fucking up early or not doing your goddamn job,
right?
In my opinion.
And
I totally agree.
You're taking the money from the people that you fucked to pay off the people that fucked them.
The most disturbing thing of it.
And you know what? Let's make sure that we only limit them to $500,000 bonuses.
Right.
Because that's what fucking Barack Obama said.
I think John Stewart was the one who said, and I don't know if this plays out or not because I'm not in the common economist.
Well, you know what? We'll look it up and we'll try to.
He said that, why not give the people who lost everything, give them the money, they pay back the banks the loans they needed, and everything keeps on working like it should.
The banks would eventually get the money.
Yeah.
What were you going to say, Rob?
What I was going to say is as fucked up as that situation is, how the banks got bailed out and the people got left to suffer, it's even worse when you consider that the money that was loaned out originally was just conjured up out of thin air.
Yeah.
Through the idea of fractional reserve banking. The Federal Reserve sets the rules on what banks can and can't do, and they only have to have 10% on reserve, and they can loan out 90% of the rest. So it's all made out of nothing.
Not only that, it was the bullshit practices of Wall Street also, where you can, when Wall Street changed from I bought stocks in a company because I believe in that company. The company is successful. I own part of that company. So if the better that company does, the better I do.
Sure.
Well, when that changed from that, when Wall Street changed from selling stocks and bonds in that ideology to, hey, this is all fucking Vegas. This is all gambling. It's almost like the mobsters got a hold of Wall Street and said, you can put a bet on anything. You can put a bet on them fucking failing and you'll make money. So you have a way of betting money on hoping that something fails. So the banks take in all these terrible loans.
And they know they're going to fail.
They know they're going to fail. Right. So then they bet that they're going to fail. And so now they're making money because they knew that it was going to fail. It fails, and I mean,
it's wink,
a
wink,
fucking
nudge,
totally,
nudge from,
it's a totally rigged
from the
game.
government says, "Hey, we'll bail you out."
Well,
Don't worry.
And I love it when you drop knowledge like that. By the way,
what's that about?
I love the name. Your name is Rocky, and then you just drop shit like that. I love it.
I love it that we started out talking about MMA, and we're now into politics.
This is exactly how I predicted the night to go.
Fighters,
you knew
fighters
it was
are
go this way.
well, you know what?
You
Fighters are not dumb people. You're being entertained by these people who are just slugging it out, and you think they're just two stupid brutes that are just wailing on each other, and I'm getting some entertainment. But these people are just really, really intelligent about everything. I mean, there's a lot of things that these guys are into: government, politics.
I think our assumption should be that most people are hopefully not just some jarhead or a fighter; that they are thinking people.
Yeah.
But you still have to hopefully give people knowledge.
In my experience, I know a lot of fighters, and there's some of them that are not really aware of what's going on in the world, and they don't seem to be too deep of people. But I tell you what, some of the deepest people I know also are fighters too. So there's extremes, and I think in all groups of people, you know. I mean, so it's hard to generalize.
We know teachers. I'm sure you've known people in the business that, you know, just kind of go along with everything and don't think twice about it. Then you have people who are more involved, that have no life, like you've said in the past, that you read a lot and you know, give yourself you find knowledge in what you're looking for, and you know, educate yourself on things. I mean, that's got to be a part of it. You have to, like you said, always be exploring, always be asking questions.
I think it really has to do with your perspective and what kind
Yeah.
of what the range of your perspective that you have. You know, that really is going to, that's the way you judge a person's character, because, you know, like Rocky said, I've known a lot of fighters that they were just people that like to fight. You know, they didn't really care a whole lot about it. But what I have noticed is they're more receptive to ideas outside of the norm because they've been outside of the norm. And, you know, as much as the public improperly perceives fighters as big brutes, big stupid brutes swinging it out in the cage, that same public is paying to watch them fight.
Exactly.
You know?
Well, hey, as a brute, yourself, would you said your mom was kind of a hippie and things like that. What is her perspective on politics or Obama at this point? And kind of, you know, you said you changed your dad's point of view quite a bit. How about her at this point?
Oh, buddy. I've heard stories about these combos.
Yeah. Okay, where do I begin? My mom and dad were both kind of hippies. My dad's about 10 years older than my mom, but they were both, you know, of the same generation. My mom is classically liberal. She's been on welfare. Welfare got her through a pretty shitty time in her life. She had a child very young, my older half brother James. She had him at 16. Moved out of an abusive relationship in Hawaii. Came to the States. Was living in Chicago, and she needed welfare, and she took advantage of welfare, and she still brings that up to this day, how that helped her out through that bad time in her life. She almost brings it up like, you know, I'm really against welfare. I've never really touched.
As if we need
subject.
Government to help people out, like people just wouldn't do that stuff on their own.
Right. But she's been, you know, she's classically liberal in that respect, and she's pretty much always voted Democrat as far as I can remember. But she has been very good about teaching me to debate, to think critically, to question everything that I see, everything that I read. And also one of the most important things she did is she gave me two different sides of the story. She gave me two different aspects. She started off as, you know, she's always supported the Democratic ticket as long as I can remember, like I said, but she supported Obama just like I did in 2008. We were coming from a president who was, for all intents and purposes, a moron. He looked like an idiot. He talked like an idiot. He sounded like an idiot. I criticized everything he did. I wasn't really that old when Bush took office, but I criticized everything he did. And when 9/11 happened, I said, okay, Bush, here's the deal. All you got to do is go get Osama bin Laden, put his head on a stick, parade it around New York City, and you'll be a hero forever. You don't have to even be a good president. That's all you got to do.
Sure.
He didn't do it. He rushed into Iraq on faulty intelligence, probably purposeful faulty intelligence.
Deceitful.
Yeah, started a war for no reason with a country that didn't attack us, that served no threat to us whatsoever. So when you go from this almost moronic president, you know what I mean, who is saying things that just sound so stupid and conducting himself almost in a shameful way. And then Barack Obama presents himself as a young, minority, charismatic, well-spoken, intelligent-sounding constitutionalist.
Yes, good ideas,
had
too.
some great
The
ideas.
audacity of hope.
In 2008, hey, I'm gonna end all the wars, baby. Everything's good. I'm gonna legalize marijuana. I'm gonna take care of all of these liberal social issues that people need, like healthcare.
I'm going to make government transparent.
Yeah, exactly. I'm gonna make
Put
government
bills online.
transparent.
Yeah.
I'm gonna put everything online. I'm not gonna have any lobbyists in my cabinet. I'm gonna justify this Nobel Peace Prize. Then he got into office, and he didn't close Guantanamo. He didn't repeal the Patriot Act. He's had executive orders, none of them that help our liberty. He's a fake. He's a liar, in my opinion.
He's 8 more years of Bush.
He is. He's an extension and a furthering of Bush's policy, which means to me there is no difference between Democrat, Republican. And there's
Right.
no difference between Bush and Obama. They're both representative of the same corrupt establishment, the same liars. And people went, oh, well, you know, everybody makes no, campaign promises are why I elect a president. And if he doesn't hold up to it, I inspect what I expect. And if what I inspect is bullshit, I'm going to call him out on it. My mom held on to the theory that Obama, and my dad did as well, were just getting a bad rap because of the same bullshit excuse I heard from every Democrat. I was a Democrat, so I knew it was bullshit. Oh, well, he just got a bad stick. You know, he got in there, and he was in office after Bush. And
Inherited all of it.
yeah,
Which he did,
Which
you
he
know.
absolutely did. Not denying it. Bush was full of shit, and he got us in a bad spot. But he also did next to nothing that he promised he would do. And when he didn't do that, instead of owning up to it and saying, hey, things changed, I got into office, I got a different perspective, I see that things don't work that way, he blamed Congress, and he blamed people in other legislative branches. My mom, as a Democrat and as somebody who holds on to those kind of liberal ideals, almost to a socialist an admitted socialist perspective, held on for a long time until the Monsanto Act. And once she reelected his stupid ass, and along with the help of my dad, and he got into office and he signed that, then they knew that they had made a big mistake, and they finally admitted, and they finally started absorbing what I had been telling them over the last 4 years about some of these crimes that he had been perpetuating with drone strikes and stuff. Then they finally let it sink into them. But me and Rocky have talked about this before. Baby boomer generation's biggest generation in human history. The biggest boom anyway. This is the first generation, coincidentally or not, that has been 100% raised and influenced by television. Not a generation in human history before has spent their entire lives watching TV. And when I talk to a lot of baby boomers, I get this complete inability to even want to believe that things could be bad, because that means that their generation is partially responsible for letting things fall. And so they go to the TV. Well, this is what the TV said. This is what the TV said. This is what Fox said. And I watch Fox and CNN, so I got a great perspective.
Okay. I get both sides of the story.
Yeah, you get both sides of two different stories aimed at directing you in a certain direction. You're not doing any research on your own, And after the Monsanto Act, she finally realized that. But I think a lot of baby boomers and a lot of older people have a hard time going, hey, sorry, we fucked up and dropped the ball a little bit. So they hold on to this ideal that this is all in our head. There's another thing that we have to keep in mind about these the older generation that has been indoctrinated basically their entire lives by television and media. And that's that they're coming to the end of their lives, the twilight of their lives. Do I really want to admit that I left my kids and their kids with trillions of dollars in debt and basically an indifference to any kind of social policy that might affect them in the future? I don't want to admit that. I don't want to admit that evil. So it's really easy for me to hold on and go, oh no, you're a conspiracy theorist. Well, yeah, I am, but you never lived through the Great Depression either, and I might have to.
I think it's tough for them to also admit that they were duped their whole lives.
Yeah,
into the whole the faulty left-right paradigm, and that they're just basically one and the same. I mean, that's a big part of people's identity.
Yeah.
And when you choose a side and you stick with it for multiple decades, and then in your 50s, 60s, you're starting to realize that it was all just a sham.
And you're a cattle.
And part of my, and I relate to my father because, he was definitely a hippie and still, leans left quite a bit. But he always, and I want to say, I can't believe I'm blanking on this, Man of La Mancha, the play, right? Where it's Don Quixote, right?
Okay.
So you perceive the world not as it is, but as it really should be, right? That was always his go-to thing is this idea of you present and you live your life in the most positive way possible. But I think that what the reality is that people are coming to learn that you have to have action. And when you said the idea of hippies had this grand idea and they didn't follow through with it, it's almost like the Occupy Wall Street movement. We've talked about that in the past, right? Man. So you had this idea of like, it sounds plausible, but nobody fucking stepped up and said, I'm the person who's going to lead this to do something.
To me, it comes back to, I don't think you can have this change peacefully.
I mean,
Occupy Wall Street, you can't get any more peaceful than a bunch of hippies, not hippies, but you have a bunch of people that are camped out in tents with no solid direction.
Yeah.
You need to have action. You need to be able to say, hey, Bernie Madoff, you're fucked.
Yeah.
And we're going to take your money back. We're going to give it all back. It's going to be a Robin Hood scenario where we give it to the poor because you fucked over people. And no, the government doesn't get that money. The people that you fucked over gets that money. Oh, Enron. By the way, Enron, we're going to take all that fucking money, the money that your kids got, the money that your wife got, and all the people that benefited from your actions, they're all fucking ruined, and we're going to give it to all the employees that you fucking ruined.
Just like what happened in Iceland.
Yeah, you're not going to do that peacefully. No, I'm not going to be able to walk up to a millionaire's or billionaire's front door and say, "Hey, man, I'm just going to sit here peacefully. I'm going to do. I'm going to fast. I'm not going to eat." And I'm going to ask. I'm going to hope that you do the right thing. That's not going to fucking happen. You got to have action,
right? And we have to understand how when corruption has prevailed in the past, how action was taken, and it almost always is violent. And the reason is because you either have a a dominant force that's willing to put violence onto the people in order to keep them afraid or suppressed, or you have the people who are responding to bad conditions saying, hey, Queen, we're going to cut your fucking head off because you are starving people to death while you're living decadently. And that's really what is happening right now. You have the elite wealth in this country who are capitalizing on the lives of human beings. There are people who are dying out. There's American service people, citizens of the world, not citizens of a country, citizens of the world who should be, imbued with the same rights that Americans are, and are not. But, they are capitalizing from essentially organized and legalized murder. At what point do we say that these people are going to reason with us and say, oh, yeah, you know what? You're right. We should all become, this great big happy family living in the world. They're not going to see things that way. In order to take their influence and power away from them, they're willing to give up their lives. You know what I mean? These are people that, in my opinion, we have enough justification in this country to violently revolt in this country and to storm Washington. I say things like that to people and they're like, you're crazy. And I'm like, no, I read history. I know we have plenty of reasons to.
No, we do have plenty of reasons. But when I talk to my wife about this, she goes, honey, look at where we live. We have a nice house. Our kids get a decent education from what we're told.
For now.
For now. We have a decent education. We put food on our table every day.
Your bubble's not affected.
My bubble's not affected.
Right.
So how dare you even think of the idea of? I mean, if you were to revolt, if you were to get into a group of people and said, okay, these are the major players, these who need to be removed. If we could knock out some satellite dishes so that people couldn't watch TV and we couldn't communicate the way we were, that'd probably be a good. I mean.
It sounds like the bad guy scenario in a movie.
Todd is laughing over here. He's smirking. But I mean, this is what pisses me off. All right?
I'm not smirking to piss you off.
No.
I was thinking that I thought of like the bad guys in a movie where the American runs in and saves the day from this terrorist group who wants to do the things you just talked about, which is revolt.
No, I'm not saying what makes me upset is when a huge group of people are pissed off. They're pissed off at the government. They're pissed off at people that are way up the fucking ladder. But who do they take it out on? The local shopkeepers. They do a riot and they ruin their surroundings.
Well, people are
and
stupid.
That never fucking affects the people that really truly initiated pissing them off.
Right.
That's what upsets me.
Well, it's ignorance. It's like racism. You know what I mean? Racism is one of the most vile forms of ignorance on the planet because it's so baseless. Scientifically, it's so dumb. You have to be so dumb to be a racist. Now, to have prejudices is pretty normal because of experience in life and things like that. But to be a true racist and say I hate somebody because of their skin color is really stupid. And people think like that. In the last 20 years, people have been basically herded into metropolitan areas. When I was a kid, there was much more rural community. There was much more farm community.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of these local economies that sustain themselves with agriculture and farm families and things like that. Now Lamont, the small town that I grew up in with my grandpa and his 80 acres and all that stuff, has been all bought up by commercial farmers. So everybody from the towns have all consolidated into Cedar Rapids and Waterloo and New York and Chicago. And people, when they're packed in like that, sardines, they don't think. They just react. They get a fear stimulus on the light box that tells them that something bad's about to happen, and they react to it and they riot. Katrina, the federal government didn't show up for 2 days. Did they not show up because they were taking a coffee break, or were they watching how shit panned out in New Orleans just to see how they could deal with that
social
situation?
Experiment, possibly.
Yeah, I mean, the society, especially people that are disconnected from food and self-preservation and their entitlement programs like welfare are in place, and not only welfare. We say welfare and we think of a program that the government gives people money for food, but just having food at our disposal in a grocery store is some form of welfare. It's somebody bringing you a good and making it cheaper for you. What happens when we, 115,000, 120,000 Cedar Rapidians, don't have food being delivered into this city?
I bring this up to Todd all the time. Well, I used to bring it up to him all the time, but I'm
not as ignorant.
He would laugh at me when I would say, "Hey, man, did you watch that latest episode of Preppers?" And he'd be like, "Oh, fuck those preppers." Now, listen, back in the day when the Great Depression happened, high 90s, we're talking 95, 96% of the U.S. population were self-sufficient. Right. They were farmers. and life still sucked.
Yep.
Right? They barely got by. Nowadays, it's completely reversed.
It's complete reliance.
Complete reliance. I mean, 7% are completely self-sustainable. So, I mean, hardly nobody jars food
No.
or cans food. When we talk about prepping, when I talk about prepping, and I haven't prepped, but we need to. Everyone should prep.
Well,
but
it's probably, and it's that show. I mean,
It's
the
the show,
idea
and
of
it's the
prepping
idea-
makes complete sense to me.
Yeah, but it's the idea that I think sometimes people connect prepping with end of the world. You know, it's not end of the world. It's the end of what the world as you know it. It's something like the Great Depression happening. If you don't have things in your cellar, you know, if you don't have food stored away,
You're fucked.
so that
You're
if
fucked.
something happens, I mean, there was a guy on NPR that said, "Hey, 3 days. I've
it.
gone to every major disaster in the last decade, and the rule of thumb is after 3 days, everyone's a fucking savage.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah.
Everyone is a fucking
Well,
savage."
And we're on the brink of something like that happening. I truly believe that, economically speaking, Keone talked about how people have been herded into metropolitan areas, and if all of a sudden the supply of food was cut off, then that would be a major problem. I mean, the way that the government has been destroying the value of our money is going to lead to a collapse in our currency, and that's going to stop the flow of all goods coming into this country, because we get most of our goods from outside this country, and right now they're willing to give us their goods in exchange for our dollars. But what happens when the value of that dollar is totally gone and there is no value left in our currency, and we can't get the rest of the world to exchange their produced goods for our worthless dollars
You don't
anymore.
think that in and of the population of what we have would not in and of itself be able to allow us to force something to happen? Or, I mean, I understand what you're saying, though.
Are you talking about like being self-sustainable here in the?
No, I mean, we are an economic powerhouse in the sense of the population that we have. People are going to want to give us their goods. We may not have the ability to exchange to it, but we'd have to get something.
There's got to be a value for value exchange. Right now, the dollar holds a special status as the world reserve currency. It's universally accepted.
Because that's how we measure
Right.
oil.
Right.
By.
Yeah, that's one very big reason. Yeah, so right now the rest of the world is happy to exchange their produced goods from their labor for our dollars.
Right.
But we are inflating our currency to the point I'm surprised it hasn't happened by now yet, but it's going to happen eventually. It's an economic inevitability that it will get to the point where the rest of the world will not accept our dollars because they're so devalued. And at that point, since we're so dependent upon imports, what are we going to do? Because we don't produce hardly anything here at home anymore. So
Right.
that point can come, and it can come anytime as far as I'm concerned, because we're approaching $18 trillion in debt. You know, it's more than our GDP. We are to the point where it can happen at any time. And it's happened multiple times in other countries.
If other countries start saying, we're calling in our debt, we're calling in your debt.
That's
Pay,
all it
pay
is.
your
It'll be a
fucking bills
it'll
right
be a
now.
domino
The
effect.
only thing that we will have left to sustain us is the money creation mechanism. And at that point, that's going to be insignificant because the money they create will be worthless.
Have no value whatsoever.
Right, exactly.
And that's inflation. That's what we've had the last ever since the Federal Reserve Act, came about. We've had inflation. Inflation's a hidden tax. That's the same reason that my dad could go buy a car in 1971 for out of $2,700, $3,000, brand new, right off the lot. Gets the same Mustang today as $45,000. It's not because there's fucking computers in the car. It's because that our dollar is worth nothing. The price of value, the price of Rocky was talking about a barrel of oil hasn't changed if you're buying with gold.
Right, or silver, right.
Yeah,
Something stable.
It's changed. Now it costs a lot more dollars, and it's not because that gold, that liquid gold is worth more. It's because that paper money's worth nothing.
Less. Yeah.
And you're talking about the actual
The U.S. dollar.
substance of that car, because it's not that the demand for that Mustang makes it $45,000. You're talking about the
Talking
idea
about
of buying the physical material part
the physical
of
materials, because of inflation over this slight inflation over the last 100 years.
Right.
Our money is being devalued. Things aren't getting more expensive. That's what's taught in school. That's what's taught in our culture, that things are just more expensive than they used to be because prices go up. Well, prices are being driven up on purpose, and this is Inflation is a hidden tax. It's the Federal Reserve saying, hey, we have 10 bills. These bills represent 10 pieces of our economy. We're going to print 11 because we want to. Now each one of those is worth a little bit less. Well, they do that on an enormous scale, which is slowly but surely robbing people.
None of us alive today have ever experienced an economy where prices don't go up. So I think most people in the world who don't understand economics think that it's just an inevitability in a market that prices just naturally go up.
Yeah.
Well, but it's not the case.
And then why is it that the middle class at this point wages have stagnated for what they said 30 years at this point? So, I mean, how can things continue to go up cost-wise, and yet the middle income has not gone up at all?
That's inflation.
Because, it continues to happen because there is not a physical revolt. You know what the Million Man March proved to me? It doesn't change anything if all you're doing is walking and talking.
Yeah, actions speak louder. But you have this miniature process where they're gonna inflate on a very small scale because people won't react to it. Right. If we all here collectively have 30% of our money taken out for taxes, ballpark, and the federal government says right now, hey guys, just to break it on you because shit's a little tight right now, we're going to take all of your tax money January through March, and then you get everything. That would never fly. Why? Because people would instantly realize January to March 31st, you're a slave. You're working for somebody else. You might get all your money after that, but right now you're a slave. You know what I mean? So they take the 30% in taxes out of the middle class, which isn't the middle class anymore. It's the lower class. The middle class used to be defined on a one-income household where a one man or one woman could go out and make a living and support an entire house, and one person could stay home and be with their family. Now, in order to have a family, most families in America need to have both families working a job. So really, we're calling ourselves middle-class people, but we're living in lower-class economic conditions. And that's not because prices have went up. That's because our economy and because our currency has been manipulated for the last 100 years and is now exactly 100% devalued in its worth over its status when the Federal Reserve Act.
It's a good point. You've talked about the idea of having a two-family household where you have one person having income and you have one person staying home with the kids, no matter who it is, and that allowing
man or a woman,
and that being able to raise kids the right way and have somebody home when they come home from school, that kind of thing. I've never thought of it in the idea of it's a norm.
Yeah.
You can't. I mean, at this point, I could not survive if my wife didn't have a job or I didn't have a job. It's not possible to survive.
So let me ask you this question: If we're in this same situation in the 40s and 50s, and my grandfather went to war, but normally at home could support the 7 kids that he had on his farm just by farming, who's at home while he's out on the farm? Well, grandma's at home. Grandma's raising the kids. Well, if we adjust the economy slightly over the next 50 years, and now the economic status of the country means that farmer and now his wife, or that production worker and his wife now have to work, who's raising their kids? Their kids are spending hundreds and hundreds of hours less time with human interaction, and they're sitting in front of a fucking television for 4 hours a day during hugely impactful developmental stages of their lives, and they're going to school. So the winners of all the wars who write history influence our children, and the television, the media that's owned by very, very few people.
It's interesting that you brought that up because just recently I heard this. Even though children are not being raised by the moms or the dads, and they're going off to daycare, even though somebody's looking out for them, if your child is going to a daycare provider every day, they've created an abandonment, a syndrome. So it's almost as if the parent said, "See ya," and they walked away. That child has developed the exact same mental, emotional problems as if you're getting dropped off at a daycare, or if the parent has actually abandoned you. It fucking amazes me. When I heard that, I'm like, I can't believe that. Because the parents are coming back every night. They're picking their kids up from daycare. But it's still so traumatic to the child that the mother or the father is not with them throughout the day.
Well, even if it's not perceivable, even if the kid is like, oh, well, yeah, I understand that mom needs to work and dad needs to work. You're still in what you would try to consider a natural life or natural environment where you're leaving your kid to be raised by somebody else so that you can go to a job. So you're basically putting that job's precedent as higher than your child, than time with your child, so that you can pay to have a child. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to have two parents that need to work to support a child, or two parents that if they do both need to work should even have a child. You know what I mean? If we're
Right.
if we're going to be logical about it.
Right. But they worked backwards with this study about people that are in prison, and they work backwards and they find out who was raised in a single parent household, and it is amazing when they came out with these facts. And I hate to reference Joe Rogan, but that's where I heard it from, the Joe Rogan podcast. And
He
the
got some
guy
good stuff.
he has good stuff.
Yeah.
So I'll put a link to that person that he was talking to. But it floored me to think that even when I'm trying to do my very best, luckily my wife or I, we're home every day. Our work schedules rotate. So I'm very lucky in that regard. But there's so many people that have to work, mother and father have to work their ass off, one or two jobs to provide for their family. And when I say provide, it's not just pay the bills and food. It's what we think is socially normal, which is the plasma TV or the LCD TV and the cable and the internet and the phones. And Jesus, you have fucking sixth graders walking to school with an iPhone.
Right.
I mean, we don't need those things, but you have mothers and fathers or single mothers or single dads raising kids that are working one or two jobs and they have no time for their kids. And then they're stressed out when they come home at night from working as much as they are. And no matter what they do, their kids are developing this abandonment issue. And they're saying that a huge majority of the criminals and the rapists and homicidal killers are from that type of environment.
Or are you taking the idea of kids who abuse drugs, or kids who commit suicide, or kids who bully in school? I mean, you think of, outside of just the criminal aspect of it, you just think of like almost like the societal norms that we're all dealing with today and trying to help kids, how that could very easily play into the idea of
right. But you've talked about in the past, hey, let's understand why we've gotten to this point.
Right.
Instead of freaking out on the people who are at this point and having death penalty and all this stuff, let's try to understand, how did they get to this point? All right, they just came out with it. We understand it.
They truly don't have free will, do they?
Oh, back to Sam
why
Harris.
did he do that?
I swear to God, I think he's got one hand on Sam Harris's cock and the other hand on the microphone.
If he was here,
But when you understand it, then you're like, oh, well, fuck, how can we not change that? And when we don't change that, we're saying to ourselves, fine.
We're accepting it.
We're accepting.
We're accepting
Okay,
it.
my kid's going to have abandonment issues.
And that's generally what's done. That people accept things until they're given a negative stimuli that is painful enough for them to have to change. And right now, people are they're expecting the status quo. They're going, oh well, yeah, as long as my kid grows up and graduates from high school and goes to college, it's good. But our children are capable of so much more than that. You know what I mean? If we were raised in a culture where one person truly did have to work, and this all goes back to economics. One person only had to work and one parent could stay home in today's society with the tools that we have with the internet and with vast improvements in communication. Can you imagine how intelligent our children would be in the United States with all of the opportunity that they have technologically? We're 17th in education.
And you wonder why. And education wise, for sure, you think about, we are putting into effect every year some kind of new policy or new thing when it comes to education to make sure that we are trying to up all these levels because we are so behind. And I always sit back and go, if we're busting our asses in so many areas to try to get ourselves to be up to where we need to be, what's lacking? How is this possible when we're so focused on it? And that could be part of it.
There's a market-based answer to that. Anytime you have a monopoly in any given industry, there's not much incentive to actually improve efficiency or quality. You could pass a law every year and say, hey, we're going to change it this way. But if there's not any real incentive to make any changes, if there's not competitive forces making you actually meet the demands of the people you're serving, then you're not going to really change much.
Yeah.
Well, is there not a moral or human aspect to that as well? It's like, if we want our kids to be more educated and well educated, or and not be affected by this, how about from a moral aspect? Can we change things? Like, you know what? Fuck it, we need to do something completely different, just for the moral aspect alone, not just because of the economic part.
Well, if you want to do something completely different, and we understand how markets work and how they produce more efficiency and better outcomes, then you should go to a privatized, freedom-based education system. Any monopoly, and government is the biggest monopoly, any monopoly is going to have unique power over their particular industry. And they're not, without competitive forces, they're not going to be forced to actually change all that much.
And be better.
And be better, right. And that's why, in my opinion, education in this country will never get any better. I mean, we can pass all the laws we want to, we can throw all the money in the world at it, but it's just the way it is. When there's no competition, you don't have the incentive to make big changes.
Something really interesting that happened to me last night. I went to a wedding. I know it sounds weird. It sounds like I'm just jumping off the cliff and going into a different direction here. I was at a wedding, but a relative of mine is a superintendent at a local high school. And we were talking for a while, and I was talking about my daughter and how in a few years she's going to be under her supervision type of thing, and the special education that she'll need. And I had her as a 5th grade teacher. And she said, you know, I remember, I asked her, I was like, how has education changed just from the time where you were my teacher to now? She goes, you know, I remember having no limitations. I remember being able to teach whatever I wanted to teach. And there was no set, hey, there was no child left behind. You had to hit this quota, and you had to score this high on this test. You can teach whatever you feel like you need to teach at this grade level. It was so open.
Would parents be informed as to what was being taught to their kids, or how did it work?
The way she was describing it, it was so much more organic and less structured and so much more fulfilling, because she had this control over what was being taught in this whole year that she had these kids. You know, she didn't have to stress over, I have to have X amount of minutes in math, I have X amount of minutes in reading, and I have to make sure that all these kids, even the lowest one, has to score a certain score in this test. It gave her more flexibility to be creative in her classroom.
But she still had things she had to make sure by the end of 5th grade they need to know these things, right?
There were certain topics, but again, it's when we talk about adults that lived pre 9/11 to kids who have never known pre 9/11. It's people who have never known going to the airport and not having to go through the security that we go through at the airport.
People that know freedom.
It was an amazing look at what was life like at one time. And it wasn't that long ago when I was in 5th grade. So I think that's really amazing that we still have people around, because pretty soon, in a few short years, a few short decades, those people are going to be gone. And the pre 9/11 people are going to be gone. And
it's all going to be normal.
And the kids nowadays are going to look back and go, they did what pre 9/11? It's kind of like us trying to think about, how did our great grandparents deal with the Great Depression? We can't relate to it.
It's kind of like how I talked about how none of us have been around to experience an economy where prices actually go down as the economy expands. We've always been accustomed to prices going up, so we don't know how that works. So yeah, exactly. And once that generation's gone, that knowledge is pretty much gone.
And it's reasons like that it makes me feel like this podcast and podcasts like this, or podcasts in general, any type of education is important, because it reminds you of what to look at. It reminds you that, hey, this is important, or this might be important. It stimulates some thoughts, some questions in your mind. I mean, the idea that Keone has this special relationship with his mom, that she said, hey, look at both sides of a story, of a situation, of a question. My parents never did that. It's great that your mom did that. You know, it's just very special that we need things like this to really make us think. and not forget that, oh, we're just drones.
Well, and,
Right.
if we're working 2 jobs and we come home and we're fucking exhausted, so where's the time to
Makes it
spend with
tough.
your
There's
kids?
there's two versions of history too. There's the history that you're taught and then the actual one. And so often people don't think about this, but the winner of wars, the people that control government and win wars, they write history. A good example of this, and I think one of the most influential and important events in modern history or all history of all time, is the Civil War. And the Civil War took place in really divided the country based on economic terms, not on moral terms, and it was certainly not about slavery, even though that's what's taught today. Pretty standard. Lincoln, if you ask most people, is the best president in American history, and he freed the slaves. That's bullshit. The actions that took place while he was in power did eventually free the slaves. But he was a white supremacist, an admitted white supremacist. Does history teach that? Does history show his own words on paper saying he believes white men to be superior to black? No, it doesn't. It shows him as the best president. Oh, he had this great moral.
Honest Abe.
Yeah, and he
freed the slaves.
He made the Emancipation Proclamation, which set the slaves free. No, it did not. It tried to make a slave revolt so that it would be easier to win a war. This isn't taught, but what is taught is the version that they would want you to hear. And like you were saying, in a generational perspective, this information gets lost, and now we only have one version of history. When if you really research it and you really dig into it, you find out there were definitely 2 sides of the story. And that affects how our country, how our economy, how everything evolves and moves forward.
And when that government has a monopoly on educating all the children in a country,
Yep.
what other option do you have for information?
Yep. You have standards set for education that say they need to score this on this test. And what you really look at, if you take a step back from the education system and you look at it, is you see a system. You see a system that produces a cookie cutter individual, somebody who is good at performing tasks, not somebody who's good at critical thinking, somebody who could be placed in a job. More and more frequently now, somebody who could do a job that doesn't have a job when they get out of high school. But that's what you get. You get a cookie cutter person who's basically trained and taught to think and behave and to believe in a certain way, which I think is completely against their potential. We lead the world in defense spending, but we can't figure out a way to teach our fucking kids how to think.
Yeah. And the RSA is I think it's a company on YouTube who they do those whiteboard kind of like cartoon kind of YouTube videos.
Oh, sure.
There's an RSA one on education that's just fantastic, and it's a guy narrating his ideas of how education should be changed, and there's somebody drawing these pictures of the cookie cutter kind of way of doing things. I wanted to go back to what you were saying before. So you and I have talked a lot about the Department of Education, and you believe it's unconstitutional.
Yeah, it is.
What do you think you would do? I mean, to give you full validity and your thoughts about that. What do you think would mean? I'm not convinced that privatizing education would be the answer to everything, but how can it be changed, and what should you think should happen incrementally or dramatically to change things to make it work better or be better that you think can happen?
There's middle ground. Yeah, I mean, obviously you can't go from a government total monopoly on education to a free market-based education system overnight. I mean, it wouldn't be workable. Milton Friedman was a great economist back in his day. I don't know if you guys have heard of him, but he had this idea of a voucher system, which would still encompass the idea that government funds education, but parents are given vouchers, and with these vouchers, they get to choose which schools they send their kids to. So they're not restricted to only going to the school in which district or which area they live in.
Which would actually create a true open market place.
Exactly.
If that school sucks, I don't want to send my kid there. I'm going to send them there. And then when that school doesn't have any students, they're going to bring up their game.
And if anything's been proven, it's that these charter schools do better. I mean, it's just a proven fact.
So Milton Friedman's his idea of the voucher system, competition would naturally emerge in such a system because parents would now have some choice. Right. When consumers have choice, then competition is going to try to adapt to that choice and try to meet the demands of the people within any given economy. So that's the middle ground option, in my opinion. I think that the total best option would be to get government out of education completely, but that's not feasible. That's not going to happen anytime soon. And I don't even think the voucher system is going to happen anytime soon. You don't even hear people talking about it anymore. But I think it would be a drastic improvement to the forced monopoly that is now the American education system.
How's the teacher union working into that, by the way?
Oh Jesus!
Hey,
listen,
I was totally
we're almost at 3 hours on this fucking podcast. So
are we stopping? Is that what
I'm
you're
going to leave it up to you guys. We can segue it out, and we can start another one if you guys are feeling great and you want to keep talking. We can keep recording on a new podcast, but we're at 3 hours on this thing, and we need to find a decent spot to say goodnight on this. It's up to you guys. What do you want to do?
We haven't even got to conceal and carry. I think that's what you guys want to talk about.
Yeah, the only conceal and carry you need Second Amendment. It's all you should.
Hey, you know what?
Right?
We could just plug his gym and how great a fighter he is.
And I'll be back. I mean, if you guys want me back.
And I would love to have you back. I love having stimulating conversation, and it doesn't have to be just about government. I mean, that's kind of our It's one of those things that I am very comfortable falling into and having an open conversation. I love being devil's advocate and being the dick and asking you questions and making you guys fight for your points. That's kind of cool. I like doing that, but it's so easy to do that. But yeah, I'd love to have you back on.
Sure,
it would be great.
One more point I want to make because Rocky talking about the voucher thing for education reminded me of this. We pay 30%. Or roughly, if we can use that ballpark figure for taxes. The majority of this money is misappropriated, misfunded, misdirected, and abused, and used sometimes for organized murder. How different would the world be, or how different would the world be if, as free citizens, as liberated citizens, the government said, hey, taxation is necessary to enjoy some of the infrastructure that we have, but you get to decide where it goes. And then we give you a biannual report saying what is suffering. That way you're truly in control of the way you spend your money. Do you think many people would spend gratuitous amounts on defense? Do you think a lot of people would do that? Or do you think they'd be more important issues like education, like infrastructure? How different would the world be if the government didn't direct that money, if we did?
I think the number one
idea.
Yeah, I think the number one thing would, if you said that to people who have kids, the number one thing would be education.
Sure.
I want my kids to be taken care of.
And in here, you make it so that it's not an income tax; it's a sales tax. Mm-hmm. So the people that spend money, the people that want to enjoy these benefits of society, they pay X percentage, but they get to decide where that X percentage goes. That's not the case now. The case is everybody pays 30%, and fuck you, we'll do whatever we want.
You know what? I think I read an idea exactly like that in a book written by Milton Friedman, close to that anyway. But yeah, that's a great idea.
Yeah.
And then you get an actual reflection of what the people value versus the money is forced away from you and then appropriated wherever the politicians think it should go.
And then they try to justify it in the media. Oh, well, we need to use your money to fund this war. Well, how about you let us decide? And I bet you anything we won't be fighting as much.
Well, I wonder where it goes. What about the ones who, the kids or the families that don't have any money, that don't pay to, I don't know how much they pay into people who are on welfare, how much they pay into things, but I wonder if their choice is taken away. I wonder if their choice is altered from our idea of what we would pay in.
I think if you allow the free market to work and if you allow the economy to flourish, there's going to be just a lot more opportunity for prosperity in those people. What puts a stranglehold on a lot of places, a lot of urban areas, ghettos, is economic influence. And if you give the people a little bit more freedom about what the government's spending money on, and you give them a little bit more oversight on how that money is being produced, more importantly, by eliminating the central banks. If you return sound money, you have an open market, and you have a fair taxation where you can say, hey, we're going to have a universal health care, and the people have spoken, and that's what they want, fine. Then you guys get to decide how much goes to fund that. And if you don't fund X percent, we can't logistically justify giving you those same services. There's an easy way to do this. We have the internet at our fingertips. We have technology at our fingertips. We could do it. Instead, they choose to put hundreds of pages of tax code so complex. The only people to know how to figure it out are people that are able to save billions of dollars on their tax
True.
returns.
Right.
Yeah, they're not gonna give us the power and voluntarily give it up themselves.
Yeah,
You
that,
know.
well, and that's the thing. If you do that and you create a tax system like that, all of the people that we were talking about, all of the super elite wealth, all of the big central bankers, all of the people who are really sitting atop the decision making in the money tree, they're basically defunded. In the same way that Mexican drug cartels are defunded if we legalize, drugs, they can't make money the same way. So I think it's the only way to be fair and just, and to have people continuously for decade after decade pay these exorbitant tax rates to fund these bullshit wars and bullshit programs. Welfare in many, many ways of being one of them. I think it's just time. The people are going to have to change. They're going to suffer, and there are people that are going to suffer. But you know what? We've made huge mistakes. That in the natural order of things, people should expect to have to take it in the ass a little bit.
There's gonna be pain.
Because Rock is. Rock's expecting to take it in the ass a little bit.
Every night.
Every night,
Yeah,
all
it's-
day, every day.
Just a little bit. Just a little bit.
Just a tip.
No,
Just to
buddy.
see what it's like. Just see that little
For the
pain.
first few times.
That's a really. I think that's a really good point because we're afraid of
Yeah.
what could possibly happen without realizing
Are
that.
you talking about Rock or are you talking about
Yeah,
something
because
else?
when it goes in
Keanu
halfway.
said.
I mean,
I'm gonna let his manhood stay right where it's at. I think that we sometimes change. We don't. It's like the frog in the boiling water. You know, what I mean, if you put a frog in water and you bring it to a boil, it'll die because it doesn't know things are happening.
Absolutely.
You throw it in the water, it's gonna jump right out again. I wonder if we forget once in a while that where we're at now took a tremendous amount of growing pains, a tremendous amount of death and debt and prosperity at the same time, that sometimes we need to step back and say, okay, so I know this might be really horrible. We need to stop drilling oil because it's ruining the environment. Well, what about all the jobs and all these things? It's going to be painful, but if it's going to better the world at this point, you might need to do that. In education, same thing. So if it means that we stop the Department of Education and we do a whole entire voucher system, so to speak, it's going to suck and it's going to take a while to get used to and it's going to be horrible. But in the end, we might have better educated kids and better educators, and overall, it'll be okay.
Yeah, and the government shutdown is a perfect example of this. You have the media on all sides saying, "Oh well, the government's shut down, and none of these federal workers are making any of their money, and they're not going to be able to spend it, so our economy is going to collapse." If we have an economy that's dependent on the spending of federal workers, then we have an economy
It's
that's
pretty
dependent
weak.
on the government, and that's a big, big problem. You know what I mean? Now you're saying that if the people in government don't spend money, our economy is going to collapse. If we take these bankers to jail, our economy is going to collapse. We're in a pretty shitty situation when we have to rely on the expansion of government to expand.
where do government workers get their money in the first place?
Us.
Yeah, exactly. So that money's still there.
Right.
You know, it's just not being taken away from the people who do produce things and given to those who don't produce.
Yeah.
Those 800,000 people who were furloughed or whatever, they said they're non-essential. Well, why are they non-essential? Why do they have jobs in the first place?
Right.
In government.
An important note is with this debt, a lot of people see debt, this 17, 18 trillion dollars, as a big number they can't comprehend. But this is truly a debt on our children and our children's children. And this is money that they will have to make up, whether it's gradually,
They can.
economically over time.
Or
We're
a
talking
total
about-
fucking collapse that
Yeah,
they have to deal
right.
with.
We're talking
Right.
about $100,000 a household. Think about that. $100,000 for every household in America is how far we're in debt. Where's that money going to come from? Not me. I don't make enough.
That's because we're when you put it in that perspective, it makes me wonder why the collapse has not happened yet.
You know why?
And then
though?
since it hasn't, I just have to believe, logically speaking, that it's coming any day now.
Yeah,
It's like
nobody
a
knows.
mathematical certainty.
Yeah,
You know,
right.
who's the guy that did the whole budgeting thing for you thing?
Oh, Dave Ramsey.
Dave Ramsey. He said, I was watching some of his things on YouTube and he goes, it's a mathematical certainty about this Obama healthcare. Okay. It is going to wreck us financially. It just is. It's a good idea. I mean, it sounds like a nice thing.
Ideologically, it's good.
Ideologically,
Yeah.
it's a great thing and it tugs at all of our heartstrings. But mathematically, let's fucking use our brains.
Right.
It's going to wreck us.
If we had a huge surplus and we had the money to justify universal health care, this might be a clusterfuck, but it might be good when we get the kinks worked out of it. We're $18 trillion in debt. We can't afford to do this. We cannot afford to do this. If we dump this much money and this much inefficiency into such a huge program at this point in time, it literally could collapse our economy. So when I'm watching like Daily Show and he's harping on Senate Republicans who mostly are morons, and he's calling them out for what they are. On the same side, I'm like, hey, I understand that, and I understand they're stupid for shutting down the whole government for this thing that they already passed. However, there's a very real danger about this healthcare plan, and not only about the healthcare plan. That's a political thing. About everything that our country does fiscally and economically, it's a disaster waiting to happen. And when it does, you'll have a populace of people who are completely unprepared for it, and they're going to be lined in the streets crying, going, "How could you do this to us? We need somebody to save us from that."
Yeah,
just like they did in Germany.
They'll blame it on capitalism. They'll try to, and then try to justify more power to themselves to try to save us from the pain.
Yeah, and
the rich
people are the enemy. But what the truth really is if you want to point out an enemy, it's not a rich person that got fair or they got wealthy in a just way. It's what we've talked about. It's the people that have been rich, that have been manipulating the markets, manipulating our economy for 100 years.
Currency.
Currency. People don't understand it. When people understand and they rationalized $100,000 in debt in their house alone, in everybody else's house, that's when the economy is going to collapse. Right now, everybody's in a pipe.
And that's why when Dave Ramsey said that, and I'm like, okay, mathematically, okay, it's not about what I hope to happen. It's not about if I'm a Republican or if I'm a Democrat. Is this the right thing? Is it the wrong thing? If mathematically it is not fucking physically possible for this to happen without us screwing ourselves over completely, then why are we talking about it?
Because they can do what they always do.
Why don't we look at all of these things with a logical, mathematical, scientific perspective?
Because politicians aren't that smart. They're not problem solvers. They're
We're
lawyers.
not that. Well, the problem is just like what
we give them
HBO
power
show,
to control our lives.
Real Time with Bill Maher. It's what Bill Maher says. We're all too fucking stupid. There's too many of us that don't sit back and look at things mathematically, scientifically, without emotion, and say, okay, you know what? I like the healthcare thing to pass, but I'm not going to vote for it. Well, why aren't you going to vote for it? Well, it's not because I'm Republican or Democrat. It's just because mathematically it's not going to fucking work. And let me explain to you why it's not going to work. Nobody has that fucking conversation.
Yeah.
Nobody does.
But it happens.
We live in we're having the conversation, but we live in a society too.
A few of us.
Yeah, we live in a society too where you can come to that mathematical conclusion, and I can, and everybody else can in the room, and we can know logically it's a disaster, and we can know factually it's a disaster.
It's morally wrong too.
Yeah, and we're surrounded by morons, and we're surrounded by people that don't understand that. So until we have, and I've talked to Rocky about this in the past, until we have a majority of people that understand what kind of situation we're in, how corrupt our government is, who's really making the money and driving the money, supplying the currency, until people are educated on that, there's not going to be any stimulus to change. But as soon as it becomes a popular idea, liberty becomes a popular idea, freedom, economic prosperity, the free market, as soon as that hits 51%, everybody will change just because they're going to follow the herd. That's what they've been doing.
And that's so crucial, especially with imminent economic collapse, because the more people that understand how we're getting to this point and how the collapse was come to manifest, the better chances we'll have to have enough people to stand up and say, fuck you. We know you caused this shit. You're not going to replace it with something even worse.
Right.
We're going to replace it with something that is sound and that is stable.
I'm going to ask you this because I've been asked this as well. Why would you not run for office with your ideas? Because they're positive, and you have people that are agreeing with the majority of what you're saying at this table. Why would you not go into politics with the idea that you can change something? Is it unchangeable, and so you would put yourself out there? I mean, what do you think?
I do think that we've been at the point for no return for a very long time. Mathematically speaking, I think that's true with our national debt. I think that the collapse will come in our lifetimes, and I just I don't have any desire to be a politician or to have power over lives of other men. I see government as inherently an immoral institution because it is by its very nature, it's force. You're forcing people to do things, and it's anti-liberty. It's anti-libertarian in that respect.
Couldn't you go in though and change that perspective? Couldn't you go in and say, I'm not ruling over everybody. This is the ideas I want to push through, these ideas I want to change, and they're not going to change. They're not going to go against anybody's liberties or anybody's rights.
I suppose.
I mean, you could do that.
I suppose I could have some influence if I wanted to do that. I just really don't have any desire to be a part of that game, just to go into that sea of corruption.
Once you get that seat, whatever you decide is going to enforce your will on somebody else.
Exactly. And I don't like
whether
that
it
idea.
is the right will, whether it is the correct thing to do, you are forcing somebody to do what you think is right.
Unless you vote no on everything. I mean, Ron Paul was nicknamed Dr. No because he voted no on almost everything because, if it involved raising taxes, he voted no immediately. It didn't matter. So it really just depends, because you can vote to repeal things, and that's not forcing something upon people. That's actually taking the burden off of them, because freedom can be defined. I define freedom as the ability to live your life from intervention of government to the fullest extent possible. And the more we can repeal and get government off people's back, the better. That's the way I look at things.
In the way that legislation is now, it's not about, and it seems like the culture in Washington is to get into Washington and to attach your name to some sweeping legislation so that you can have a legacy attached to some law. When it really should be, to Rocky's point, the prevention of unjust and unneeded laws to be passed. We have certain freedoms that are protected, and I agree with Rocky. I think any law inhibits our freedom. Now, I think that if you're going to live in a civilized society or a state or a country that identifies certain laws, it should be one that limits those laws to the ones that inhibit other people's pursuit of life, liberty, and and happiness. So if you pass any unjust law that affects anybody, I don't think it should be passed. I think their jobs should be to prevent this shit from getting passed. And our law books, instead of being hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of volumes of legislation and regulation, should be one piece of paper that says, essentially, do unto others. You know what I mean? If it's going to inhibit on somebody's rights to live freely, you can't do that, or you will be punished for it. Not, we're going to write 300 pages of legislation, slip 3 or 4 different laws in there, or a couple different earmarks that I need for my district. The whole thing is a clusterfuck. And if Rocky runs for president or runs for any kind of office right now, he's running with essentially a large populace of paid off snakes who have much more campaign funding than he does. I think that's starting to switch a little bit now. And I've had people ask me the same thing. Would you consider running for office? Before, I'd say no, because I'm almost pushing myself into a system that I can't defeat. Because if I don't vote for any bills, I might not, get reelected. If I don't have any campaign support, I might not get the seat in the first place. But now with social media and with internet, I think there's a growing movement of people who aren't lifting to, or they're not listening to the right or left paradigms, the CNN Foxes. They're going in search of their own answers, and they're thinking of alternative methods. So what I'm hoping is, if there's ever a time when I get involved in politics, I can run a completely grassroots campaign with nothing but social media and local support and slowly build my way up. Because otherwise you're catering to snake oil salesmen.
And that could happen unless the internet 2.2 comes out.
Right.
2.0? Is it 2.0 or 2. Whatever it is.
Yeah.
It's when they basically take away the idea of the internet and they only
free.
allow you certain websites.
And they've been trying like hell to take control over the internet. I mean, they got control over the TV stations. They got control over the radio stations, all the airwaves. The internet is the one thing that's still almost totally free.
It's like the Wild Wild West. It's still, it still is.
Yeah. Well, and it's supposed to be. It was always billed as it's the Wild Wild West. It was always billed as this is free. College is, like I said earlier, college is going to disappear, and everybody can get a college education now. And now it's more expensive than ever before. And we're going to be able to communicate with people across the world for free instantaneously. So there's not going to be a need for conflict and war and misunderstanding and ignorance. Now, what is the internet? A sales tool. A porn engine.
It's the last thing that America does well.
In MIT and Harvard and Princeton, I want to say there's one other Ivy League school puts a ton of classes online for free that you can just watch and be part of. But you don't have the piece of paper that goes along with it. But you can
You can follow along and educate yourself.
Educate yourself, but then you're not going to fit into the society's idea of what you've earned or not
earned. We now
earned.
have a society that doesn't have that, or we have a country that doesn't have that many jobs. You've got all these people that have been convinced over the last 20 years that college is the only way to get a good job. But now production jobs are almost all gone. So you had a lot of people that would graduate from high school and go work in a factory, and then doctors and true specialists in their fields that needed 8 years of education to get this high-paying yet rarely needed job. Well, now you have a lot of production jobs going overseas. A lot of people going to colleges, going into $50,000, $60,000, $80,000 of debt to get some bullshit piece of paper for some information that they could have gotten all free online just to justify to an employer that they're not going to quit. Well, a lot of those people are getting out of college with their 4-year degree, and they're going to work in Transamerica, where I worked, with a high school degree, because there's nothing in their field for them. You know what I mean? You're better off going to trade school a lot of times monetarily in this country now.
Are you full circle back just the gym only? Is that all? Is that your main income now? Is the gym?
As of right now, yeah, that's the gym and retirement money that I'm living off of while I try to build this gym up. Yeah, so I'm not getting any other income from any other source outside of fighting. It's not easy, and then you have all kinds of bullshit from a tax perspective that you need to report, and if you don't report everything right, you get audited, and then you know what I mean. It truly is that the country that we live in. I used to be really proud to live here, and the fact that I'm not now saddens me. Not because I'm not proud of the ideals this country was founded on, but just where we're at. It's a sad state of affairs. When I can say that we are what we fought against in our revolution, then take the fucking flag down, call the country something else, but don't keep pretending that we have this illusion of freedom. Don't talk to me about war and go, freedom isn't free and our troops fight for your freedom. God damn it. No, they don't. They go out there and they get killed because some rich man wants them to. Let's be honest. That's what it is. It's hard. Is it hard for a military vet's family to stomach the idea that they died for no reason whatsoever? I have no doubts. And my heart goes out to those families. But if you want to be literal, logical, and forward thinking, all of these men and women that are going overseas and dying, they're doing it for nothing. They're all dying in vain. And they're coming home in body bags that our government doesn't even want to be published because they don't want the American public to be too sensitive about it. We're trickling down the same journey that Germany and a lot of other tyrannies did. And when you say something like that, people go, oh, you're going to talk about Hitler? What do you know about Hitler? What do you know about how Germany rose to power? What do you know about Germany's hyperinflation and their distressed economic state that led to a very, very desperate people to elect a fucking crazy madman that then polluted their minds? This is all documented.
And look at our situation. We're approaching a situation economically that's very similar to what happened in 1923.
Following all the same steps.
In Germany, yeah.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
We're going down that same path, but if you say that, you're an extremist because you're talking about Hitler. I'm not talking about Hitler because I'm a right-wing or left-wing extremist.
Right.
I'm talking about him because I've read a history, and I know how that whole thing broke down, and it's breaking down just like.
Yeah, I mean, you got people talking about, what was it, the Prime Minister of Venezuela or the President of Venezuela talking about Barack Obama and directly correlating his thoughts with saying, hey, we are the shit. We are the people. We are...
Putin's American exceptionalism, and Putin gave him shit about it, right?
Right. Well, Putin did, but also the president of Venezuela said, this is exactly what Hitler said.
The hard part is that I mean, and not to take away from what Keanu said, I think sometimes we start talking about Hitler, and then everybody's like, oh, you're correlating these two things together. We're talking about the idea of the state of the economy when things happen.
Yeah,
we talk about the grandiose idea of what we are as Americans.
I'm not saying that Barack Obama is Hitler.
No.
I'm saying that when you follow the logical, if you want to follow things like mathematically, scientifically, what were the prerequisites that led up to Hitler
taking all that power? I think most people, when they hear the word Hitler, they automatically associate it with, and they should, eugenics, Holocaust, very, very terrible things. But there's also other very valuable lessons we could learn from the whole process that helped Hitler come to power. So when you make a comparison, it's almost not worth it. Unless you're talking about people who understand all that.
And one of those things that Todd's going to hate is he de-armed a nation.
Yeah, he de-armed the Jews. I think he allowed people of the Nazi party to own weapons. But that was it.
When you pass laws to take weapons out of homes, all of a sudden people can't fight back.
Same thing happened in communist Russia too, as far as I know. You can't have a government that totally controls the people if the people are armed, of course, you know, because if you have a rifle behind every blade of grass in your country, I mean, how much can the government really do? Nowadays, they have the technology to probably take us out if they wanted to. You know?
Sure.
So
Sure.
but back then, it was totally different.
Well, you said that too. You had lots of friends who were just freaking when Obama got elected. They just freaked out and bought tons of guns and tons of ammo.
We're talking thousands of rounds.
And when you said,
ammunition.
you know, the reality is, if the government has the best weapons, the best technology, if they really want to take you out, your rifle's not going to matter.
One guy was freaking out and he was really pissed off one day. And I said, listen, I understand you have all these weapons. I understand the reason why you have all these weapons. But if the police came to your door one day and they knocked on it and they said, Mr. So-and-so, we have a warrant to come into your house. We have reason to believe whatever. At what point, what exactly in your mind has to happen for you to go get your weapons and shoot everybody that's out front of your house?
I could tell you what my personal point.
Well, I asked him, and he's like, I don't know.
Yeah, I've got mine too.
No, seriously, what would be your absolute? This has to happen. That you're going to put your wife, your kids in jeopardy. You're going to start blasting out your door at the police, at the local police, and you might know some officers. What would have to happen for you to do this? I mean, don't throw the argument out that I have weapons to protect myself from the government if you don't have a very specific, I've drawn a line in the sand, and if you cross this line in the sand, and it has to be a really highlighted, of course this is immoral reason for them to come to me, I have every justification to start blasting. What would it be? And he had no fucking answer. I said, so don't give me that answer. Don't tell me that.
You haven't even thought about it, huh?
You haven't even thought about it. It's just such a it's just such a stupid pounded in thing into his head. I have weapons to protect myself from government. Okay, fine, that's great. I totally accept that. But what would you do? What would have to happen for you to actually revolt? Well, and if you don't know, don't throw that out as an answer.
And people, you know, when it comes to the government versus the people, the government can smash the people. Let's be honest. They've got fingers on nuclear triggers. We've known that for 50 years. If the government really wanted to smash the populace, they could. They can't, though, because then they don't have any work. They don't have anybody to produce anything for them.
Nobody to siphon off of.
The worker bees are all gone.
And furthermore, that we have to entrust that the military at some point is going to say, hey, something's not right about this. You're not going to pay me to kill American citizens. You know what I mean?
Now that was a great thing that you saw in Egypt. You know, the military actually started backing the people,
right,
and said, "Man, you're out. We don't want you in here anymore. The people have spoken, and we're going to help the people get you out." When that whole thing was happening, I was like, that is the essence of democracy. Mm-hmm. You don't like what's happening? Everybody rallied. They got the fucking guy out. They wanted a new person in. Sorry to say, it was the Muslim Brotherhood, but that's who they wanted. So who are we to say? Well, they get in after a year or two.
And that's also,
hey, you're not fucking doing what you said you'd do. We want you out.
That's also democracy. That's also the shitty part of democracy too, because there's probably a lot of people who did not want the Muslim Brotherhood to become in charge of them and call the shots over their lives. So the majority makes the decisions for the minority and everybody else too. So in that sense, it's not a very moral system, in my opinion. You see what I mean? How the minority
for making decisions
right.
for other
I could still have hated maybe I loved what the president of Egypt was for me.
Right.
Maybe to me, he was the man.
Right.
And a whole bunch of people rose up and like, fucked up my plan.
The 51% can dictate the rules for the 49% in democracy, basically.
Yeah, and it's funny because in Egypt's case and a lot of other cases, America had a lot to do with who was running their government many times. So the people didn't really have shit to do with it. You know, we had coups staged in Iran in the 50s. Mm-hmm. We removed governments from power in classified operations that had been unclassified. That it doesn't get any more tyrannical than removing a country's government so that it can be more like you. That's what we did in Iran, and we're surprised that we have diplomacy issues.
And we did it over and over and over again.
I swear to God.
the point where we went against the idea of democracy.
Yeah.
And we removed somebody out and put somebody who was worse in because we thought we could control what they were doing.
Right.
I mean, it happens. I want to say there's 6 documented things of that, whether it's Iran, it's Haiti. God, I knew I'm pulling a Rick Santorum moment.
But we know.
Sorry.
I mean, we know it's been done before.
It's been done over and over again. But
Right.
it's the hard part for me when it comes to that part of it is the idea that we never learned. We never ever learned. We're gonna take this guy out. We're gonna put somebody in that we can control. He fucked us. All right, we're gonna take this guy out. We're gonna put somebody in that we can control, who's a fucking horrible person. Oh, damn it! It's like over and over.
If there's
and over
one thing
again.
that I keep seeing is that we should be more of an isolationist type entity.
Well, that's
the
what
government.
for a
our
while, at
forefathers
least for a
country.
while.
Yeah, that's what
Get
our
our shit
forefathers
together.
intended. Hey, we can trade, we can relate, we can get along with other countries, we can sow the seeds of liberty and show people why a free market and why a free society is good. But that's not what our country does. Our country goes in there and forces our will upon them. And I saw a funny meme that says, I'm gonna spread the shit of democracy, spread the shit out of democracy in this house while a soldier is kicking down a door, something to that effect. It doesn't have anything to do with freedom. It doesn't have anything to do with what this country was really founded on, the principles it was founded on. It's militarism, and it's taking over other people's lives against their will, and a lot of times, it ending their lives. And it's a joke. Going back to guns, not meaning to change the subject, but a lot of people do put forward that ideal that guns are there to protect the people from the government, which they are. Of course, times have changed a lot now, and the government holds a pretty high card over our firepower. It's not musket versus musket anymore. But an armed populace who is willing to fight and willing to potentially die is a dangerous thing to a greedy, powerful government. The reason that I have weapons is not because I'm afraid of my government. It's because I'm packed in a sardine cans with a lot of stupid people that might try to take what I have in a desperate move. We don't know how people are going to act.
The economy shuts down, and all of a sudden Target and Walmart and everybody else doesn't have groceries because the semi trucks haven't delivered anything, and they start going door to door looking for fucking bread. Hey, dude, your fucking kids start starving, and they start crying, and they can't sleep at night, and you have no idea what you're going to feed them the next day, and the fucking water meter's shut off.
It's 3 days.
You're going to get fucking crazy.
And I'm telling you, this goes back to what my dad said. Am I going to live in the world? I'm not going to, he's not going to own guns because he's not going to perpetuate the idea that I live in a world where that might take place, which is not reality.
That's exactly
right.
what
reality.
My dad said. If I live in my mom said, if I live in such a world, then I just want to die and I don't want to be a part of that. Well, you know what? A lot of other people said that in Europe too, in World War II, and they got hauled off to camps and tortured and murdered when, if they would have had some means to defend themselves, at least they could have put a bullet in your head. I'm never going to allow somebody to take my life willingly and tell me what I'm going to do. So it's all fun and games, and it's principally, it's a really noble thing to say, oh, well, I'm not going to own a gun because if I need to use it to kill somebody, yeah, well, what if somebody's trying to kill your grandkid? Are you going to go, principally, I can't fire upon you, so you can go ahead and murder my child? Because you've never had to deal with shit like that. But all over the world, every single day, somebody does have to make decisions like that.
Right.
Oh,
And when you make people hungry and you take water and food and reason away from a very spoiled populace, especially, we've got, how many people, you said 8 to 10% people ready for that type of thing right now. Okay, that means that 8 to 10% of the populace, such as myself or you guys that are ready for this, if you have food and guns, are targets.
Yeah.
With 90% of the people now breathing down your neck going, oh, you got food because nobody else does. How about we kill the shit out of your whole family and take your stuff?
That was one of the big things that me and a lot of my friends were laughing about when we were watching these preppers TV shows. We're like, okay, that's where I want to go.
Right.
You got how many years worth of food in your cellar?
Yeah. And
I'm there, dude.
And they're the minority. So, they call them preppers and they call them conspiracy theorists and kind of nuts and crazies. But you know what? If the shit, what we call the shit hitting the fan, if the shit really hits the fan and we deal with a complete and total economic collapse and society every city looks like Katrina within 1 week and food supply shuts down and oil shuts down and all kinds of shit is breaking out and craziness is going down. those people will be geniuses, and they'll be our survivors, and they'll be modern day patriots, just like people that were ready. The people that were ready for the Great Depression prospered because of the Great Depression.
Right.
And we're in a situation right now where, because of how ignorant and naive our population is and how pampered and spoiled they are, it's easy to look at a prepper and go, "Oh, you're just nuts," until you're starving.
And the
then
idea,
he's your best friend.
and the idea of prosper is surviving.
Right.
I mean, it's not prosper in the idea of like, whoo, I made something of it. It's like, I survived the calamity that took place. That's prospering.
And that's survival of the fittest.
There you go.
You have a bunch of undereducated people not ready for such an event, which is a pretty ignorant position considering how frivolous our lives are and how small we are on a universal scale. You have people barking at people, "Oh, you're crazy for thinking that." No, you're crazy for not thinking that it's a possibility, because history shows it's a possibility, especially with like the currency collapse. 100% of the time in a fiat currency, it collapses every single time.
Without exception.
When I was really watching these shows, I was watching the prepper shows, and my wife couldn't stand it. She's like, "Oh, can you just change the channel?" I go, "Babe, what's wrong with?"
Part for me is, and I would think that your wife is on the same boat. It's the kind of crazy, born again Christian aspect of some of that stuff is kind of bonkers for me. End of times kind of stuff.
No,
this kind of stuff I can read.
I
can understand and kind of encapsulate what they're talking about. But this idea of the apocalypse and Christ returning, that's the part that turns me off.
Again, you just jumped right to the end of the world type thing. I was just watching the preppers thing, and she was just like, "Can you just change that? I just don't like thinking about it." And I go, and I broke it down. I'm like, "Hey, hon, this is in case think of it like there's a flood. Think of it like there's power lines down, and the milk and all that shit is rotten, and you can't go to the grocery store for certain things. I mean, we got to have certain things to protect ourselves and to feed our kids. And do we have 3 days worth of food in our refrigerator? No.
Well,
do we have 3 days worth in our pantry? No. So why don't we look at it that way?" And she goes, "Listen, I don't want to even think about that. It's so depressing. It's so scary for so many people, because it was scary. So scary for my wife. She said, "I would much rather pretend it could never happen."
Let's talk about perspective though for a minute.
That's
to somebody who's never dealt with a great calamity like the Great Depression, looking at a huge stocked up pantry full of weaponry and food is depressing, because geez, that means that I got to prepare for some really, really nasty event, and we're spoiled. To somebody who survived the Great Depression, it's a completely different view. It's a view of security and safety and well-being.
Right.
And so if you've never lived through an experience like that, or like an economic collapse, you don't have a true appreciation for what this stockpile represents. And when we're talking about, this show, this prepper show, we have to also remember it's entertainment. It serves to be entertainment.
Right.
And if you're showing me and Rocky, sorry, Rock,
you're good.
We're showing me and Rocky as, normal preppers that, have a good food supply and a bug out bag and maybe some weaponry. We're not really that exciting of people. We're pretty laid back. We're pretty chill dudes. Some of the people I've seen on this prepper show,
you're not practicing clearing your house every night.
I'm not practicing clearing out, and I think that's the episode that you're referencing is the one that I was thinking about with the lady and her husband.
Yes.
I watched that at your house.
Yeah, she's teaching people all these she's like a certified self-defense coach.
That one was 300 pounds.
She's suckering people into paying her money to illustrate how to survive. She wouldn't survive a fucking day in a situation like that. The techniques she was showing were garbage, and if she tried to do that against a mauling marauder 220-pound guy with an axe, she's gonna lose every single time. You know what I mean? So a lot of that stuff is entertainment, but if you put me and Rocky on a show like that, we might not be entertaining enough to watch. Then people might take us seriously, and they might see this as a different thing. The good news is, the more people I'm starting to talk to more, the more normal people that are almost literally afraid to say, "Hey, I've got stockpiles of stuff. I'm ready for an economic collapse." There's more and more people coming out and going, "Hey, they're not trying to hide how fucked up our situation is. I'm not going to hide it anymore either. I'm ready." And
people are talking about it. Yeah.
And so you feel like the idea is you're not living in fear. You're recognizing the reality of the situation, that it seems like things are going
right.
And so it's not a fear-based thing. No. It's a reality-based thing.
Right. Sure. And I have a greater sense of security knowing that I'm somewhat prepared in case something were to go down. I don't have to freak out and go to Walmart or Target in the case of a collapse and try to get what I can off the shelves.
Right.
You know, which a lot of people would be doing in such a situation.
And luckily, I mean, you're thinking about you,
Right.
which is a much simpler thing to think about. You're by yourself. You're an individual,
Right.
Whereas which basically means you and I are. It's actually it's
nice.
It's pathetic. It's really pathetic because we have
Rock
children.
is like he's like 5 blocks from my house. That's all I'm saying.
But we have children that we need to think about. You know what I mean?
Children change the game. And
they do.
Me and Rocky have talked about this before. He's got a great advantage. He's single. He's got nothing attaching to him. If the shit really got nasty and he needed to go bug out with a little bit of military training, some supplies, he'd be good to go. I have 2 kids that I have to ensure their survival. And that puts my survival at risk. You know what I mean? It makes us a bigger target. And people, that is a scary thought to think about, but we've never had to think about it. So people often don't. But I would rather think about that in advance, think about the potential possibility and plan for it than be one of those poor parents that we do have an economic collapse. The economic sky does fall. Now I can't feed my kids and I have to look at them in the eye and go, I had all of the information I needed to predict this could happen, and I still failed you. I'm not going to be that guy. You know, I'm just not going to be that guy.
I just want to bring some sunshine to this gloom and doom here.
What are you talking about? I love this.
Well, go ahead, finish your thought.
All I was going to say is, mathematically, it's pretty certain that our currency is not going to survive, based on the fact that all fiat currencies throughout history end up collapsing. We know it's going to happen. You know, we have the evidence to support that. But we don't really know exactly what that's going to look like. We don't really know for sure whether that's going to mean people are going to go without their basic needs being met, whether there's going to be a shortage of food. We don't know that for sure. But the people who are prepping, they're taking precautions. And let's say it's not that bad. What have they hurt by taking precautions? Nothing.
That's so funny he said that because I was
all.
just thinking when Keanu was saying that, I was thinking to myself, when you hear people who are talking about climate change, you know, and one of the arguments is like, okay, say that everything that they say is going to happen doesn't happen. But at least we were like preparing ourselves so that, you know what, we're trying to make sure we're doing the right thing and it doesn't happen. So, you know, worst case scenario, we did the right step.
Prepare for the worst.
So why should I not?
Mm-hmm.
Well,
even though I find I honestly to this point in the podcast find guns abhorrent. It makes me think that I probably want to have some knowledge about them. I probably want to be somewhat, you know, prepared in even in the smallest sense. If I'm going to have the same idea of I'm a huge person that thinks that climate change is a huge calamity, but I feel like I'm doing things to help myself. But people who are saying that climate change is not possible, I'm like, why would you not at least say, hey, maybe it is happening? And so I need to put myself in the same position saying, wait a second. Okay, so maybe I think this stuff is a little kooky, or maybe it's not. I don't think it's as bad.
Maybe
like
it won't
you
affect
said.
me in my lifetime.
Right.
And it
but
might
maybe
not.
I should, but maybe I should be prepared to do that.
Worst case scenario, you have camping supplies and a self-defense weapon if the shit really got nasty.
Right.
And nobody wants it to get. But if somebody's attacking my family, if I have a home invasion and somebody's, you know, this happens all the time. Families get murdered all the time by an invader who's cracked out or messed up and wants their stash. I want to be able to defend myself. The worst case scenario, if I stockpile a couple goods in a bug out bag and some weaponry, is that I have it and that I can go camping every once in a while with some extra food. The worst case scenario of the alternative of my failure to prepare is me having to go through the disgrace of looking at my kids when their lives are in danger and say, I wasn't ready to protect you. When I put myself in the worst situation of the worst, which is potentially having to see my children get murdered because I wasn't able to defend them, it scares me enough to preemptively prepare. And what people learn from the Great Depression is to stick your money not into banks and not to trust banks, but to put it in your mattress, to save for the future. That is wealth. What, you know, the collection of what you have is wealth, and the collection of who you have is wealth, not money, not monetary, you know, response. So I think it's better to consider all options, but to prepare for the worst. And if I went into mixed martial arts training and everything was candy and I prepared for the best possible situation, I'd get the shit kicked out of me. I have to put myself
for the
in
worst.
bad spots. And then when I get put in those bad spots, I don't panic because I'm ready for it. And even if in a lifetime,
That's a great analogy.
even in a
Yeah, it
lifetime,
is.
Definitely.
we don't need it. I don't need it. Okay, fine. My kids can take my guns and my food and sell it or throw it away or do whatever they want with it. But if there's ever a time in history where history calls upon me to say, did you make the right decision? Did you ensure your survival and your children's survival? I will be able to say I did everything I could. And I didn't laugh it off as some joke like the 300 other million dead people that used to live in the United States.
Yeah. All right. Hey, I have to do it. I got to cut it off. I got to do it. Hey, but Keone's going to be back again.
Yes.
I hope so. I
Absolutely.
had a great time.
Fantastic.
Great podcast.
Rock, you going to be back again?
Oh, of course.
Rock is always bringing it.
Todd?
Oh,
Yeah.
I'm here for the long haul, buddy.
All right, buddy. Well, hey, I had a great time tonight. There's going to probably have 2 pages of fucking links on this. Either that or I'm going to break it up into 2 podcasts and I'll put some recording of myself in here later and break things up a little bit.
It'll be 2. We'll break it up. We'll break it up for you.
Yeah. But hey, I really enjoyed it. Thank you very much. Keone, how do people look you up? How do they look at your gym?
HardDriveMMA.com is the gym website. You can find me on Facebook, Keone Coke, or at HardDriveMMA on Twitter. And I'm very, very vocal about my beliefs. So befriend me and converse.
And Coke, by the way, is spelled Koch.
Yeah, just like the Koch brothers.
Just, yeah.
No
But
relation.
not the same.
Yeah, but no relation.
But not the same.
No relation.
Oh, yeah. Thank you again. I really appreciate it. I loved having you on.
It's fantastic.
So much more than a fighter. So much more than an MMA gym owner. So
We should have known. Rock would
Yeah.
bring a friend that
we should have.
can bring it.
I gotta
Just
give you more
an
credit.
assumption.
I don't
All
fuck
right.
around.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for listening. Hey, Todd, how are people going to follow us?
Make sure you go to theprimalscream.org for the website. On there, please subscribe to iTunes and get our downloads for our podcasts. Follow us on Twitter. We're at the Primal Scream at Matt and Todd. And we want to give a huge shout out to everybody at this point who's downloaded our podcast. We're excited at the numbers that we keep seeing, and we like the people that are out there enjoying us. If you want to be part of the conversation, make sure you comment on the website. We want to hear everybody's point of view. You heard a lot of point of views tonight. Please let us know what you're thinking and be part of the conversation, and we will bring it up. We'll add it to the whole gamut of what we're talking about. But we appreciate everybody listening to us tonight.
All right. So I'm Matt.
I'm Todd.
I'm Rock.
I'm Keone.
We'll see you later.
Adios.
Have a good night.
Later.